Jane Logie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I rise to take another call on this bill that was previously the Support for Children in Hardship Bill. And I'd like to start my contribution with referencing back to a submission from a Plunket nurse who was working in Christchurch East, talking about the reality of the children's lives that some of the children's lives that she was seeing on a daily basis, because this bill should be about our children. This bill, we were told by the government, was it delivering on the child poverty being one of its main priorities in this term. And it is a bill that I think it fails so significantly. So from the evidence of this Plunket nurse, she was telling us that she's going into houses, rental houses, where families are paying a lot of rent, that they're cold and damp houses, that families are struggling to heat because they don't have enough money to do so, as well as the challenges, particularly with the challenges of the quality of the housing, that some of the houses lack curtains and carpet, and those families are not able to afford to provide that themselves, that there's very little personal space for the children that she's seeing, and that in winter everyone is in the same room. And we know that's one of the key contributors to the spread of infectious diseases, that it is not an exaggeration to say is killing some of our children. That she is seeing vulnerable babies sleeping on couches, sharing adult beds, because the family cannot afford the appropriate sleeping conditions for their babies, where the families are incredibly stressed, that there's poor food in the house, sometimes no food, that the adults are skipping meals, trying to be able to afford to give their children that bare minimum, that their children are experiencing the parents' stress, that infectious diseases, particularly respiratory diseases, measles and skin infections, are happening as a result of this poverty, and that these families are deeply embarrassed, that they feel the stigma that is being associated with the rhetoric that we hear from this government of saying that it's their fault, they need to get into work, and that that would fix everything. Some of these families are in work, and some of these families, children, because of the sicknesses and illnesses as a result of their housing and the poverty, need additional care, which mean their families cannot go into full-time paid work or even sometimes part-time paid work. So our system as it is operating at the moment is causing sickness that is keeping parents out of the workforce, and we are telling them that the answer to this is for them to get into the workforce. And that is at the heart of the message that the government is giving in this bill, and it is completely, willfully ignorant to the reality of the root causes of poverty and the challenges of these families. And when this is the government's big answer to child poverty, it just deeply, deeply disappoints me. And I think we need to be reminded that in this bill, where the government's saying that they're increasing the per family benefit rate by $25 a week from next year, not immediately from the introduction of this bill or even when the budget was introduced this year when they announced this, but next year, because they prioritised the surplus over even the small amount of money to these families whose children are suffering, this $23 a week. When the academics and the advisors told this government that to move any of those beneficiary families out of poverty, the minimum, just to move a small group of those families out of poverty that was required from government was $30 a week. And they chose a level below that. I've said it already in this house, but it just offends me. Because it was a conscious policy choice not to move any of these families who are unable to work out of poverty. And this is their answer to child poverty. It is not an answer. And yet we are having to swallow this dead rat of supporting this bill because $23.10 a week when you don't have shoes for your kids, where you're going without food, where your kids, you're struggling to pay that, what the government thought was insignificant prescription fee. It matters. But it's not going anywhere near solving the problem. And the government's emphasis on taking away family choice, to say that these families will be subjected to more sanctions, where up to 50% of these families' benefit could be cut for not meeting an appointment, which is what we saw, I think, the New Zealand Council of Christian Social Services evidence of over 80,000 families that had their benefits cut in half over a year, and that 2/3 of those families, it was because they'd missed an appointment. So I'd like to see Alfred Naro deal with every single one of those concerns, which I'm sure many of which were not valid. And if you do want to contact him directly, as he's kindly offered to help, it's alfred.naro, N-G-A-R-O, at parliament.govt.nz. And I do encourage people to take the government up on their word of, since they seem so convinced that the system is not unfairly penalising anyone or that everyone is getting their entitlements, which the evidence we get from this side of the House does not reflect that reality. But to get back to the point of around that $23 and being completely inadequate, that it's also, unfortunately, going to increase inequality. Because we know that the families that are struggling the most at the moment are those with more children. So this means that it's because it's a per family rate that the families that are struggling the most are going to get the least, their children are going to get the least out of this. And those families are the families that we need to be investing in. If we understand the concept of investment and the concept of an ageing population, then we would get that actually a bit of money up front now to help those young people, those children, to be well, healthy and participate and engage in school and have good outcomes will pay off for those of us who are likely to be relying on their workforce participation into the future. But this government's concept of investment seems to be a concept that doesn't meet my understanding of that word. It really seems to be so constrained by this focus on the short-term fiscal bottom line for this government, not the well-being of our children and not actually investment in the long term. And I do want to mention that we've been told that there was good evidence about dropping the age to require parents for looking for this work to the age of 3. The evidence that was provided was that that's the average age that people are doing that. That's no evidence of why this is a good idea, because actually, you know, that it could well be that these families who are requiring income support are there because their children are sick. We know that a significant number of these parents in this situation have children with disabilities who require their attention. Significant numbers, over 70%, they say from international research, leaving violent relationships and their kids need them there. So it's not comparable. And actually the Office of the Commissioner for Children also said that while it's the norm, he wasn't sure whether it was a good thing. And that there's research showing that families in Auckland and parents in Auckland are returning to work earlier, and that is being economically driven. And again, if we were thinking and putting our children at the heart of our decision-making and our planning, Would we want to say that economic necessities should override the choice of parenting and the decision-making about what is best for our children, particularly when we know that not all jobs are better than no job? Actually, some jobs cost in terms of stress and in terms of money, and that it's the children in these situations who sometimes pay. And this bill is a sad, sad disappointment.
Derek Ball.